Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're diving into a high-stakes historical narrative that is really going to challenge how you think about leadership and courage. We're looking at a besieged city, a paralyzed king, a prophet thrown into the mud, and a grinding daily war for survival. The lessons here are absolutely profound, so let's get right into it.
Hello everyone, this is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 37 and 38.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Jeremiah 37 and 38, look at a case of false hope and imprisonment, and then recount a muddy cistern rescue. After that, we'll cover Zedekiah's secret final warning and wrap the whole thing up with the daily war for truth.
All right, section 1, Jeremiah 37 and 38. To really grasp what's happening here, we've got to understand the massive threat of the Babylonian Empire and their puppet king, Zedekiah.
So the crucial point here is that King Zedekiah neither understood nor learned God's will until his tragic end. Even though he was put in power by the foreign invader King Nebuchadnezzar, Zedekiah and his royal officials just completely ignored the prophecies God provided through Jeremiah. We are looking at this brilliant yet totally devastating character contrast. Right, on one hand, you have Jeremiah, a prophet who is unwavering, obedient, and completely willing to suffer for the truth. But on the other hand, you have King Zedekiah. He holds the highest office in the land, but he's entirely ruled by fear, indecision, and just a tragic inability to grasp reality. He wants good news, sure, but he doesn't want to change his behavior to actually get it.
Moving on to Section 2, False Hope and Imprisonment. This brings us right into the rising action, where shifting military movements create this deadly illusion for Jerusalem and disastrous consequences for our prophet.
And this brilliantly illustrates the tension of the whole situation. On one side, you had this false hope. The Babylonian army temporarily packs up and withdraws because they hear the Egyptian pharaoh's army is marching out. I mean, you can imagine the absolute relief and celebration in Jerusalem, right? They think they're totally saved. But then comes the harsh truth. Jeremiah receives a word from the Lord and has to be the bearer of incredibly bad news. He prophesies that the Egyptians are going to go back home, the Babylonians will return, and they will literally burn the city to the ground. He basically tells the people, do not deceive yourselves. And let me tell you, delivering a harsh truth when everyone else is celebrating a false hope, that makes you very, very unpopular.
Which leads directly to this rapid sequence of persecution. Just follow this timeline with me for a second. Jeremiah is simply heading out to the territory of Benjamin to claim his family inheritance. He is not running away. But on day 1, he gets stopped at the gate by a guard captain named Erijah, and Erijah falsely accuses Jeremiah of deserting to the Babylonians. Jeremiah denies it, but it doesn't even matter. The next step? On day 2, he's dragged before the angry officials, severely beaten, and thrown into this makeshift dungeon in the house of Jonathan the scribe. And he just rots there for many days. It's only way later that King Zedekiah, kind of acting out of pure desperation, secretly pulls him out to ask if there's any new word from God. Jeremiah says, yes, you will be handed over to Babylon. But Jeremiah uses this brief audience to literally beg for his life, asking not to be sent back to Jonathan's house. And Zedekiah relents slightly. He moves him over to the courtyard of the guard and gives him a daily ration of bread.
Okay, Section 3, the Muddy Cistern Rescue. Now, as we move into chapter 38, things go from bad to absolutely horrific for Jeremiah.
So Jeremiah continues to preach the truth, surrender to Babylon and live, stay in the city and die. Well, the royal officials are furious, and they demand Jeremiah's death. And instead of protecting his own citizen, King Zedekiah basically shrugs and says, he's in your hands. He just totally surrenders his own authority. So the officials take Jeremiah and lower him into a cistern. I want you to really visualize this visceral, terrifying detail. A cistern is an underground water storage pit, but there was no water in this one, only deep, thick mud. They didn't just toss him in, they deliberately lowered him down into the muck. And the text says Jeremiah began to sink. He's left there in the pitch dark, sinking into the mud, just waiting to starve to death. It is a suffocating, nightmarish scenario brought on entirely by speaking an unpopular truth.
But thankfully, someone finally takes a stand. While all the native officials of Judah are just standing by, a foreign official in the royal palace, Ebed-Melech the Cushite, takes dramatic action. Step 1, he bravely approaches the king, actually interrupting him to say, these men have acted wickedly. Jeremiah is going to starve down there. Step 2, he somehow gets the indecisive king's approval to mount a rescue. taking 30 men with him, which, by the way, shows you just how heavy and difficult this rescue was going to be, or maybe how much pushback he expected from those other officials. And then step 3, they find old rags and clothes to pad Jeremiah's armpits, and using ropes, they heave the prophet up out of the sinking mud. It's just an incredible rescue sequence showing how a single person's courage can literally change the course of history.
All right, Section 4, Zedekiah's secret final warning. After this crazy near-death experience, we shift to a clandestine meeting. The king is desperate. He swears an oath not to kill Jeremiah and essentially begs the prophet for guidance. He wants a way out.
Jeremiah delivers a stark, unbending ultimatum. There is no middle ground here. On one hand, if Zedekiah walks out and surrenders to the Babylonian officials, his life will be spared and Jerusalem will be burned. It's a bitter pill to swallow, sure, but it brings life. But on the other hand, if he refuses to surrender, the city falls, it is set on fire, and his wives and children will be captured. The harsh truth is laid out perfectly before him. The choice is his.
So you might be wondering, why doesn't Zedekiah just surrender? Well, the source material reveals something pretty incredible. King Zedekiah expressed fear that he would be handed over to the Jews who had already defected to the Babylonians and that they would abuse him. I want you to really appreciate the tragic irony here. Here is a man with all the titular power of a king, a guy who literally holds the fate of an entire city in his hands, and he's completely paralyzed by the fear of being mocked and abused by his own people. He's more afraid of losing face in front of a few defectors than he is of God's judgment or the destruction of his entire kingdom. It's wild.
Now, this secret meeting ends with a fascinating moral nuance that we really need to unpack. See, Zedekiah knows that if his ruthless officials find out he was asking Jeremiah for advice, things are going to go badly for him. So the king commands Jeremiah to keep the core of their conversation a secret. He tells Jeremiah, if they ask you what we talked about, just tell them you were begging me not to send you back to Jonathan's house to die. And when the officials do question him, that is exactly what Jeremiah says. Which brings up a really provocative question. Was Jeremiah conspiring with King Zedekiah to lie to the officials?
Well, the answer from the source text is a resounding not necessarily, and here's the breakdown of exactly why. First off, he only told part of the truth. He actually had previously begged not to go back to that dungeon, so that was a very real concern. Second, he made a conscious choice to keep the rest confidential. And third, and probably most importantly, he had absolutely no moral obligation to reveal everything to officials who had just tried to murder him in a muddy cistern, right? This wasn't a malicious lie, it was an exercise in righteous confidentiality. He protected the king's secret because the king had a right to a private conversation, and Jeremiah definitely had a right not to hand his enemies any more ammunition.
And that brings us to Section 5, a daily war for truth. The warnings were given, the choices were made, and the consequences finally arrive with the devastating fall of Jerusalem.
The text tells us simply that Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard until the day Jerusalem fell. Just think about the contrasting fates here. Zedekiah's fear of unpopularity and his refusal to surrender led directly to the exact disaster he was trying to avoid. His family was captured, he was blinded, and his city burned. But what about Jeremiah? His unyielding obedience to a harsh truth made him deeply unpopular. I mean, it got him beaten, imprisoned, and thrown into a literal pit of mud. Yet, that very same obedience kept him safe right there in the courtyard until the prophecy was fulfilled. He survived because he anchored himself to reality, not to the fleeting approval of men.
And that leaves us with this final, powerful takeaway from the source material. Jeremiah's entire life and mission wasn't just a single battle. It was a constant, grinding, daily war. He had to wake up every single day and choose to speak the truth in a society that desperately wanted to hear comforting lies. So, I want you to really think about this for yourself. Are you ready to surrender to the truth, even when it is wildly unpopular, even when it costs you? That is the ultimate challenge Jeremiah 37 and 38 leaves us with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep seeking the truth, and I'll see you next time.